What's up guys, this is Desm101, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the PlayStation TV once again. Now about a year ago I covered the PlayStation TV in relation to the PlayStation Classic to see how they held up against each other. But now we're going to be looking more in depth at the PlayStation TV, seeing what it's like using it in 2019 as a hacked system and if it holds up. So let's find out.
You can't talk about the PlayStation TV without first mentioning the PlayStation Vita, which debuted in 2011 and has been supported by Sony up until 2019, to the point where now they're no longer interested in making handheld game consoles any longer. And the PlayStation Vita was a pretty impressive system for its time. It was loaded with features like front and rear touchpads, a wireless data connection through AT&T, and cameras as well. A lot of which I feel like were somewhat unnecessary and actually hindered the system later on as far as compatibility goes. It had overpriced memory cards though, as well as a somewhat lacking library and support from the AAA titles from Sony. So you had some other great games like indie titles and a good variety of them and lots of good Japanese games, good imports. But overall it was just a system that had a hard time. And moving on to the PlayStation TV, which is essentially just the internals of the PlayStation Vita without any of the touchscreen or any of those portable components, which made it a really small and compact system. But it seems that Sony didn't really understand how to market this. You can see in Japan that they were really wanting it to be kind of an all-in-one system for your TV for lots of entertainment and media. But in the US, they didn't seem like they were so sure exactly what they were trying to do with the system and who they were marketing it to. And of course, later on, it went that a lot of people were interested in using it to use it for remote play with their PlayStation 4, which is a pretty nice feature. Unfortunately, it just never really caught on much, with more people seeming to ridicule it and make fun of it than be interested in it. So it kind of came and went, and I picked one up during this time when it was shortly after release, just wanting to try it out. I didn't have a PlayStation 3 at the time, and I had a Vita, which I was enjoying, so I figured why not get this? It would kind of give me another option to play some of these good games that I was enjoying back then, like Ys, Metal Gear Solid Collection, Uncharted. But I didn't really understand that there was going to be such a compatibility issue, and I didn't know that it was going to be lacking in features. But it still gave me some ability to try stuff like PlayStation Now to test it out, see what I thought of PlayStation 3 games, which ended up leading to me getting a PlayStation 3 later on. But the game system just kind of languished and I didn't touch it for a while until I thought about hacking it in 2018. So in 2016, the Henkaku hack was released, and it's basically a website where you would go to. If you're running the 3.60 firmware, you could click on the install button and it would run a script that would install the Henkaku on your system and allow you to run custom firmware. And this was really helpful at the time because the team here at Molecule also released it with an application called Vita Shell, which functions like a file browser and allows you to do special functions like connect your device through USB, run an FTP server, and swap memory cards, along with other features like theming. The developer known as The Flow created this app and also authored some other helpful applications like Adrenaline, which lets you run PSP. Currently, you can go to wololo.net and find that all versions of Vita firmware are hackable, and I've used this site as my resource for setting up all of the stuff on my systems and as reference for this video, so I do recommend going there to do research if you're interested in hacking it. And they've got great information on how to configure the emulators and what's out there, and there's forums, and you find that there's quite a big community and scene around this, with the Reddit for Vita Hex boasting some 42,000 members. So there's definitely a lot of interest in this and a good community behind it, and as we'll see from some of the examples of homebrew coming up soon, there is quite a bit of passion behind many of these projects. With that, let's go ahead and look at the Vita Homebrew browser, which is the repository for all of the applications, tools, and ports that you can run here on your hacked system. So there is a lot of different variety to the games and options that you have here for what to download, and some very helpful utilities as well. So I recommend browsing through it, and that's one of the most interesting things, is seeing all the various updates that come along the way. So the first game to talk about today is The Hallway from Vita Hex, and this is one that I did find on the homebrew browser, and I've been very impressed with it. It came out a little while back, earlier this year, and it's a recreation of the Silent Hills playable trailer. So it's done in Unity, and it's not totally optimized, but you can see that a lot of painstaking detail went into recreating that experience, and it's something that I'm really impressed with, and it definitely gave me quite a scare. So I'm highly recommending checking this guy's work out, and even supporting it.
Have any information that can help believe.
If you've heard of Open Beats of Rage, or Open Bore, you know that you can play a variety of beat 'em ups, and it's available here on the homebrew browser. So I just got a couple random packs to load up and test out, and this is a lot of fun. There is just a ton of variety and a lot of potential here for what you can do with this. So this one is called Splatterhouse Deception of the Mask, and it's basically all of the Splatterhouse characters coming together in a beat 'em up game where you can play as the different versions of Rick. And it's pretty fun. It's a little repetitive, so you kind of fight the same guys over and over again for a long time, but there's still enough variety and detail to it that really makes it fun to play. Here we have Battletoads and Double Dragon The Revenge, which was really a polished game in my opinion. It basically includes sprites from various sources: Double Dragon Advance, from the Battletoads arcade game, from the Super NES Battletoads game, and it puts it all together in this really neat package. It's a lot of fun, really addictive to play. This is one of those games that you just start going into it and you don't want to put it down. It's awesome. And for another good example on the port side of things, we have Quake 2. Who doesn't enjoy a bit of Quake 2? This is a pretty polished port with quite a bit of features, including hardware acceleration, dual stick support, high-res texture pack support, and multiplayer with both local and online games featured online servers. So it's definitely not a slouch on the port side of things, and you can find a lot of other ports like Doom and Xmen, and quite a number of them. So let's dive into the wide world of emulation, starting with RetroArch. And RetroArch on the Vita is somewhat lacking. You'll find it to be quite buggy, and I've encountered a lot of difficulty with getting everything to work the way I want it to. So a lot of features are missing, and some games just don't want to load one time and then load another time. configurations don't seem to save right. So what we're going to do is focus on the ones that have a little bit of issues. If you run NES, if you run Sega Genesis, those will run fine. But here we're going to check out the Game Boy Advance games. And this is Gradius Galaxies. And we can see that it's running pretty good here. Now, with Game Boy Advance, I have mixed results with some of the emulation. It's not always consistent, it's not always great, depending on what game you're playing. So for example, Pinball of the Dead, just generally I can't really seem to get that game ever running at full speed here on any of the emulators that are available. And some emulators for Game Boy Advance just kind of outright crash or have really bad sound issues. As you can see here, it works pretty good with this one. I think this is VBA Next. And there are some sound issues that'll pop up later on and some slowdown that'll happen later on when there's more stuff going on. So it's not perfect. Another one to check out is Mario Pinball Land. And this is kind of a lesser known, obscure oddity. But hey, it's pinball, so I just love to shout out pinball games, of course. And this plays pretty fair. It's definitely not a bad way to play the game if you want to test it out. But like I said, like Pinball of the Dead, if you try to run that on here, you're not going to have much luck. Or if you try to run Doom for the Game Boy Advance, there's almost no way it's going to work. It's just going to crash, or it'll just run really bad. Alright, here's some more MAME titles. How about Wonderboy? So the classic old school arcade games generally are going to work pretty well. But with like many versions of MAME, you're going to run into compatibility with your ROM set list, like what versions of the ROM set you have. And I've always had some struggles with that, so it took me a while to find exactly the right sets that would work with the different versions of MAME. There's like 3 or 4 different versions, and so that's kind of a headache because you have to know which ROM sets work with which versions of MAME, and some games just have lots of issues. Like RoboCop is one game that I can't seem to get it to run perfectly how it used to be. But here Wonderboy is running good, so generally the older games are going to work well. Here's kind of one of those main standard games that you have to test on an emulator to see how it does. And that's the ultra popular TMNT arcade game. Who doesn't love this? I mean, this is just a timeless classic. Never gets old. I never get tired of hearing that theme song. And this one we're seeing is running in MAME 2000, and it's pretty much a very correct version of the game as far as I can tell. There might be some pixel kind of widths and things that aren't accurate that can be changed in the settings, so there are a number of settings you can change in the video output, and it's not always 100% perfect or exactly to be what the game was originally intended to be played as, but it's usually enough options to get it to display in a good, acceptable. So here's another arcade game. This is Air Gallet. And it's running fairly well, but there is some shimmer, as you can tell. And this is in MAME 2003. So it has some differences in the way that the performance, depending on the version of MAME that you have, you might get a little bit variation in the video output. But still, it's highly playable and a lot of fun to check out these games. And I see it as kind of a double-edged sword, as trying the compatibility out and see what works and what doesn't. It can be a little frustrating, but when you do find those few games that are really cool and you want to come back and play them a bunch, then you've got this great list of games that you can just jam out and have fun with. And that's pretty nice. For greater accuracy, I found that PFBA, also known as Portable Final Burn Alpha, was a bit better than MAME. And you can run Final Burn Alpha in RetroArch, but you can also run it from this separate app here. And for me, this front end was a little bit better for displaying accuracy, giving a bit better options for the visuals. And the game performance was generally very good. Now, admittedly, the ROM set wasn't as extensive here that I have, but I'm showing off this game Battle Garrega, which is one of those top-class shooters. It has these really hard-to-see bullets, but it's incredibly detailed by Rising. As you can see, it's running really great here. There's also a version on the Sega Saturn. Though this is running in a mode that allows the screen to fit, so it's kind of smashing some of the pixels, resulting in not 100% accurate display. And here we're going to test out Truxton 2. And what you're seeing is all of the stretching and screen filling settings turned off. So this is the original pixels. And of course it's really small, but if your TV can zoom in, for example, on the PlayStation TV, then you can get this at very high clarity. And now this is it with the pixels set to stretch. And you can also hear that in the sound, the music isn't accurate. It's got some kind of slowdown in the sound, so the emulation still isn't 100% across these various emulators. Some of them get really good and very near close performance to accuracy, and other times it's just kind of a ways off, but still quite playable. Okay, now we're going to change gears a little bit into the PSP side of things with Adrenaline. Now you saw me running those PS1 games on the previous video through Adrenaline, but here we're going to be taking a look at the PSP emulation from Adrenaline, and then we'll also take a look at some additional emulators that have been previously developed for PSP that I'm running in here now, which offer some better compatibility compared to RetroArch. Here's a couple great PSP games that I wanted to mention. Of course, any chance I get, talk about the Gradius series. And this is a Gradius Collection. And we're just going to run the PS1 classic Gradius Gaiden, which was never released in the US, but is largely considered the best Gradius game to play if you're a fan of the old school series. And as you saw previously, there also was that Salamander Portable, which was only released in Japan. But that's another awesome title. If you're a fan of the Gradius series and shoot 'em ups, and you want to play them on your PlayStation TV, those are some really good titles to get on the PlayStation TV. So you can see it's running pretty fair here, no issues. You've got the screen settings, or you can stretch it or run it in its original aspect ratio, which I'm doing here. No problems that I could notice. And for something a bit more demanding, here is Wipeout Pulse. And from what I can tell, it runs the same performance-wise as it does if you've got it directly installed from PlayStation Store on the Vita home screen in a bubble. So I think the output from the PlayStation TV isn't the best in the world. It's a 720, it's HD, but it doesn't go to 1080p. It goes to like 1080i, but who wants interlaced image? So you want to keep it at 720p. And it's not super high quality. Like I think, other systems from this era did have some better video output overall. But still, performance-wise, the game is running good, and it's the same in my experience from the majority of all PSP titles that I've tested from within Adrenaline. Now for the first of the emulators that we'll have a look at within Adrenaline is Neo Geo. And I got this included in a pack of emulators that ran from a VPK installer for the Vita shell. It came with a bunch of emulators in addition to this Neo Geo one, like 7800, ColecoVision, TurboGrafx 16, which TurboGrafx 16 works pretty good, by the way. But yeah, some titles did give me an error when you're trying to run them in here because of sprite allocation in the memory. Still kind of tweaking that, so I haven't used these emulators before, installing them on the PlayStation TV. So there is a little bit of a learning curve with setting up those settings like the memory allocation, which there is some options in the setting for, but I'm still kind of messing with it. But once you get the game up and running, it's pretty impressive. It's not perfect, you definitely see some shimmering and some scrolling issues in the display, but overall I feel like these are some of the more playable ways to access Neo Geo games on your PlayStation TV. Here's Metal Slug 3. So yeah, you can run these, not all of them, but some of these games will run on RetroArch, and you can use like a version of Final Burn Alpha that has Neo Geo compatibility. But generally, it didn't run quite as good as what we see here, and some of the more demanding games, which weren't loading in RetroArch, are able to run here on the PSP emulator. So this has been my preferred way to play the Neo Geo games on the PlayStation TV. And here is SNK versus Capcom. And I felt like this one runs pretty good, and this is a demanding game as far as resources. And I didn't detect any big errors or anything wrong with it. I'm not an expert on this game or anything, but it seems to play pretty good to me. Okay, and to wrap us up on the emulation side of things, I just wanted to have a look at this CPS2 emulator, which is similar to the Neo Geo one. It has the same kind of interface and settings and everything, and it also similarly runs it pretty well, with some rather demanding and impressive games being able to be selected. So here's Battle Circuit, an awesome underrated beat 'em up from Capcom, which has been getting more exposure due to the beat 'em ups collection that they put out. So I'm pretty stoked about that, but this is an awesome game. I really like how you can sort of power up your character with additional abilities after each level using a money system. To me, that really adds a lot of replayability to this game. It makes it a standout beat 'em up, and one that I often go back to even nowadays. But again, only minor issues here in the display, some uneven pixels, some shimmering. But overall, I feel like this game runs really well. And here's another Capcom title that's recently been getting more exposure due to it being released on that Capcom arcade stick, and that's Progear, an awesome horizontal shooter from Cave. And this is part of those late Capcom arcade releases, similar to like Mars Matrix is another really impressive one that runs on here. What's another one? But yeah, you can tell the sprite art in this game is just gorgeous. And as far as I can tell, it runs without any problems. Oh yes, Gigawing was the one I was thinking of. Gigawing runs pretty good on here as well. And it's an awesome shooter from Capcom you should check out. Okay, and finally here is Xmen from Capcom. And this was the game that started that whole Capcom versus Marvel craze, or Marvel versus Capcom. And going back to this game, I forgot how different it was from those other, I was remembering it that it was more similar to Marvel versus Capcom, but this is way different. Just the look of the energy bars and the way the game plays is quite a bit different. It's pretty hard. But still, wow, this game is super impressive, and there's lots of interesting scrolling and stuff going on. Runs really well here. This is my preferred CPS2 emulator. Alright guys, so as we wrap it up now, I'm going to give you my final thoughts as I show some footage from some games that I still love playing on the PlayStation TV. Some native games that were made for it, not just emulation. And these are games that I think hold up great, and I still highly recommend them. I go back to them all the time. They're still worth quite a bit of your time to play, I think. So, overall, I think that the cost of the PlayStation TV is a bit expensive nowadays. I see them going anywhere from $100 to $200 or a little more. So I think if you can get one at $100 or less, it can be worth it if you're interested in hacking it and setting it up with custom firmware and using the homebrew browser. If you're into that kind of stuff, I think the learning curve is kind of steep, but I don't know if I'd really recommend paying much more for it. On the PlayStation Vita side of things, if you're into portable gaming, I think it's a bit more of a worthy investment because the portability and the screen, especially if you're talking about the first gen PS Vita with the OLED screen, that's highly recommended, and that's the one I have too. Now, I'm somebody who travels a lot for my work, so it's great for me to just throw my PSTV in my work bag along with my PS Vita, and I can, you know, play the PS Vita when I'm like on the plane and stuff like that, or when I get to the hotel room. It's really nice to be able to just plug in the PlayStation TV and run all my emulators like that. You know, I have a DualShock 4 controller, which pairs with it no problem, and you know, that works phenomenally. It's a little expensive, you know, to spend that much on a controller. I think you can also use PS3 controllers if that's maybe more affordable for you. And I even bought 2 of those DualShock 4s. So, you know, a lot of the PlayStation Vita games that you saw that are running emulators like in the RetroArch, that does support multiplayer. So you can pair 2 of your DualShock 4s to the PlayStation Vita and it works fine, of course, or the PlayStation TV, I mean. But running it in PSP, that's when I ran into some issues. I don't think you have the DualShock 4 multiple controller support in there. I wasn't able to get that working, so you know, those are some things to consider. And also that learning curve, like I mentioned, that was a big thing. I think a lot of people might be thrown off by some of the complexity. You know, I know that since I originally set it up when I did it in 2018, it had already been around for like a year or two. But it was still pretty complicated. Now it seems like things are a lot more simpler. There's a lot more tools that let you use a switching, you know, a SD to Vita switch, and you know, memory card management tools and stuff like that. So those are all some important things to consider that I didn't really cover a ton in this video, and which, you know, moving forward, I'm planning actually to update my PSTV to just run on SD to Vita. And during the creation of this video, I actually encountered some memory card corruption on my USB, where I'm not able to download new VPKs either from FTP or do it directly from the homebrew browser. You know, it's very, I mean, a couple games still let me install them, but for the most part it seemed like that USB is on its way out, so I need to back it up. You know, when I tried to do a disk repair on it, it didn't work. Sometimes in RetroArch, when I'm running a certain core like MAME, it'll incorrectly list the wrong core as currently running. That could, as far as I can tell, that could be a source of some of the errors that I've encountered. So, and then running on my PlayStation Vita with SD to Vita, you know, it's basically an micro SD card that runs in the game card slot. That doesn't have many problems at all. It's been more consistent for me than running off USB. So that's why I'm going to update that moving forward on my PlayStation TV, and I'll probably make a follow-up video, just a quick short one, early next year sometime, to kind of give some more information on what my experience has been updating it and trying to fix some of these issues with the USB. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. You know, I think it's still worth it if you're a fan of this kind of homebrew, if you're a fan of the hacking scene, if you're into that technical kind of stuff. I think it's totally a cool thing, and I'm behind a lot of these developers who are pushing this forward. But it's not for everybody. You know, I'm not recommending piracy. I think that's something to be concerned about too. You know, a lot of these games are still available on storefronts for the actual PlayStation TV, like you're seeing here, Hotshots Golf. You know, I recommend purchasing those games to support the producers, developers, and the publishers. So that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. Tell me what you think if you have one of these systems, if you like the PlayStation TV. Thank you so much for your support and staying to the end of this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good one. I'll see you next time.